Thanks very much, AJ. And again, I hope everybody enjoyed the first session of the launch. This second part, the conference, I just wanted to look at the objectives of this. It's really to look at the larger, wider, broader governance and economic contexts for transforming the industries, the foundation industries. And we will be hosting breakout groups after our keynote lecture, where we will be hearing from 3 of the industry stakeholders who are sitting on the stakeholder steering group, and then we will be hearing from some research papers. We split this into 3 streams, as you'll see, and then we still want to hear discussion on your views on the contextual drivers and barriers for transforming the industries. The way we will do that, if you could just share the next slide, please, AJ. So this is the breakout, the breakout sessions. We have parallel sessions on ceramics, cement, and glass, chaired by Phil Purnell, and then we'll have a parallel session on metals, chaired by Rossi Secchi from Cardiff, and then a parallel session on paper and chemicals, chaired by Graham Ormondroyd. And you'll be given instructions on how to move to those later. So in terms of how we share, could you share the next slide, please, AJ? Again, it's please use the Padlet application. The link is now in the chat. Sanju has put that link in the chat. Again, introduce yourselves. Use the Padlet to help us identify the drivers and barriers. And if you hear anything in the discussions in the rooms or in the presentations in the separate breakout rooms, please add those ideas and into the Padlet app. I don't want to talk any further because it's not. This conference is not for me to talk. It's for us to gather your ideas and for you to hear some of the industry experts and some of the academic experts. But firstly, if you'd like to move on to the next slide, please, AJ. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Bryony Livesey, Dr. Bryony Livesey. Bryony leads the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, which is a parallel challenge to the Transforming Foundation Industries Challenge. It's a large program, and previously Bryony was head of technology at Costain, with responsibility for identifying and developing new technology. And before that, she was head of the Research and Development Centre for Doosan Babcock, where she established their global R&D centre. She has a long history of developing clean energy, and I would like to hear, I think we all like to hear, Bryony's views and perspectives on the industrial decarbonisation strategy, and possibly how that links with what we are trying to do in the TFI challenge as well. Bryony, over to you.
Thank you very much. You've given me quite a daunting scope of things to talk about, and I will do my best. So, as Marcus said, I lead the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, and I'd like to just give you a general overview of decarbonisation strategy as I see it, supported thankfully by a few slides that Bays have let me use, so they're reasonably up to date and authoritative. And then I'll take you through a bit of what we're going to do in the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge over the next couple of years. So if I could have my next slide, please. The Industrial Decarbonisation Strategy itself was published in March 2021. And this slide is just really a reminder that actually that strategy document's got a lot of good stuff in it. You tend to think these strategies come and go, but there is a lot of detailed information about plans for developing industrially decarbonised regions, for example. And it's worth refreshing yourselves about what's in there if you get time. I think it's a really useful document that I probably haven't spent enough time reading myself. Next slide, please. So one of the interesting graphs in that strategy sets out various ways of how we might reduce emissions in industry. And this is one of those. It's showing in green the potential for resource and energy efficiency, and in black electrification, and in orangey red hydrogen, which includes blue hydrogen associated with carbon capture and storage. And then we have biomass in yellow and carbon capture and storage itself applied to industrial processes in a sort of dark blue color, and then some small amount of residual emissions by 2050. So all this is saying is that there is an expectation of a large role for carbon capture and storage in terms of production of hydrogen and decarbonising various industrial processes directly. And the next slide, please. This is a summary of how the industrial strategy anticipates that we will get to net zero by 2050. So everything that's in green is a policy, and the orange things are changes that is expected to come about as a result of those policies. So obviously we're in the policy development stage, and as we move towards the middle of this decade, we should start to see real outcomes from what's already being planned now. So by, for example, 2025, we will have 2 carbon capture clusters in place in the UK. And then by the end of the decade, we'll have 2 more carbon capture clusters in place. And by 2040, we're anticipating having the world's first net zero cluster fully operational. And it's interesting to see all the work that comes in policy to encourage all of that development. And ultimately, we can see over towards 2050 that we will have almost no fossil fuels unless with carbon capture. And a topic which I know is dear to the hearts of many of the people in this group, the zero avoidable waste of materials. And that the target to achieve that is clearly in the fairly far future at present. The next slide, please. And this is just summarising some of the policy actions that have pretty much happened, because one of the great things about COP is it's driven a lot of announcements that might have been spread out over a fairly long period of time. So in the run-up to COP, we have seen a lot of consultations around the emissions trading scheme for the UK, for example. We've seen the hydrogen strategy being developed, and we have not yet seen the UK net zero strategy being published, but we're expecting to see that quite soon. And so many things are coming into the public domain that will help to guide what we do in the future. So that's all I was going to say on general policy, and I personally think the direction of travel is reasonably encouraging and supportive of what we're trying to do. And I'm going to move on to industry decarbonisation itself and what we're doing in the industrial decarbonisation challenge. So if I could have the next slide, please. Probably all of you are very well aware of the amount of carbon dioxide that comes from industrial processes, and recognise that some of these industries are in what we call cluster regions, and some of them are not, and they're split roughly 50-50. So what we're doing in the UK is putting a lot of focus on what we can do in clusters, simply because there's a lot of emissions there, the number of sites is quite small, and we can make a huge difference to the amount of emissions in a fairly understandable way. It doesn't mean that all the other emissions don't need to be tackled as well. And, you know, one of the reasons why we need to really link up what we're doing in the IDC with what you're doing in this programme is to make sure that, you know, we get maximum value from each other's existence. So we can see in the clustered regions iron and steel currently contributing a huge amount to the overall emissions total, and then various other industries, amongst them contributing substantial amounts as well. And this is not accounting for emissions from power in these same regions. It's just the industrial emissions. So if we move on to the next slide, then I just wanted to take you through briefly what we're doing in the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge. So we focus very much on carbon capture and storage infrastructure development, and also on hydrogen production and distribution at full scale. And the reason for that is that the cluster regions themselves are located in coastal regions. So these are the ideal opportunities for decarbonising with carbon capture and storage and hydrogen. It doesn't mean that the clusters themselves are not looking at a whole array of other decarbonisation options. Obviously, we need to look at as many options as we possibly can, but within this programme, we focus on these major infrastructure elements. So we got 3 elements of the programme. The first one is called cluster plans. It's in the middle of the slide. It's the smallest amount of investment that we're making, but I see it as really potentially the most crucial. So this is where we're funding 6 cluster regions around the UK. So in South Wales, the North West, Scotland, Teesside, Humberside, and the Black Country. We're funding all of them to develop plans for how they will achieve net zero in their region. So they don't have to achieve it with technologies we've got available today. They're quite forward looking, but what they do need to do is make sure that all the local stakeholders who need to be involved are involved. So we're trying to make sure that the plans are developed locally and that they really suit the needs of local business, and that local authorities and other stakeholders fully understand what's coming and what benefits that might bring to the region. So thinking about inward investment, jobs and skills, of course, as well. So those cluster plans are, what will happen from now to 2030 and beyond to decarbonise the regions. And then in the deployment strand of the programme, this is where we're actually building stuff. So if you know anything about the costs of decarbonising major industrial processes, you probably realise that £172 million, whilst a lot of money, doesn't really buy you much in the way of infrastructure on the ground. And what we're really supporting in the programme is the engineering studies to get the costs and the planning consents for building the pipelines and the offshore infrastructure, and thinking about which processes to use to decarbonise industry. So all of this funding that we've got from public money is, of course, more than matched by the industries themselves. So overall, the programme's about £500 million in total. And in each region, we can see massive plans for developing new infrastructure. But because they're very much closely linked with the cluster plan development, the idea is that they'll try to not just build infrastructure to suit one particular project or one particular company, but it will suit the region as a whole, and people will be really aware of what industries are coming along that might want to use those pipelines or the hydrogen that's going to be developed. And then in the third strand, of course, we've got to think about the future, and we have our Industrial Decarbonisation Research and Innovation Centre, which went live on the 1st of April. They're currently setting up their initial set of projects and working directly with industrial stakeholders to see what the key priorities are. So if we could move on to the next slide, I'm just going to show you our projects on a map. Well, thank you. So what we're showing here is just so you've got an idea where we're working, where the projects are. So the Black Country doesn't have a deployment project. That's really looking at plans for the future and how we might decarbonise a heavily industrial region, but one which is not close to sources of CO2 pipelines and storage and so on. And then around the UK, we've got all these other projects underway. They've all got websites and so on. You can find out about them through our Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge website. So if we move on to the next slide, please. I just wanted to give you one example of a project. I like this one always because it's probably the most easy to explain, but all of the clusters have got plans somewhat similar to this. They're enacting them in various different ways, but they're all looking at infrastructure on a massive scale. So if we look at this picture right in the middle, we've got hydrogen production, which is at the heart of the HyNet project in the Northwest. And what they're doing is producing hydrogen from natural gas and capturing the carbon dioxide and sending that in the orange pipeline offshore into Liverpool Bay, where they will be using some of the oil and gas infrastructure, which is no longer required for extracting gas and will be used for carbon dioxide storage. And then what we've got to do is use the hydrogen that's been produced in the region. So you can see black pipelines snaking out around the Northwest, going to industry, going to think about transport, heating, homes, all the sorts of things that we talk about. And of course, also the Northwest is blessed with potential sites for hydrogen storage in salt caverns also. So we can see lots of things going on in this project. What they're doing is the planning consents and the design of all of these facilities, getting the costs understood, and then hoping to move towards the next phase, which of course is construction in the next couple of years, subject to government support. So if we move to the next slide, I just wanted to remind you and sometimes remind myself how much has happened over the last 2 years. So we kicked off this Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge in the middle of 2019. And at the time, it was government policy to establish a low carbon cluster in the UK by 2030, and that we would have a net zero cluster by 2040. And that felt quite ambitious, but all we have seen happening over the last couple of years is massive increase in government ambition. So now we've ended up, we saw this originally in the budget and then in the 10-point plan and now in the strategy itself. We've got our plan to have still the world's first net zero industrial cluster by 2040, but also we would have 4 major industrial regions with the necessary decarbonisation infrastructure by 2030, and a target for capturing emissions direct from industry in addition to the targets which look at general decarbonisation of the UK energy infrastructure. So that is a fantastic achievement, and I think it's because we have really got such great projects within the challenge that I think we've been able to support government in that real increase in ambition, which is, I think, great to see. And then my last slide, please. Thank you. So just in terms of where are we up to and what's next? So all of our projects are underway. Everything has been launched and we don't have anything that's not yet in progress. And what we're expecting is that by March 2023, all of our cluster plans will be finished and available for people to look at. By March 2023 to March 2024, our deployment projects will be also finished and ready to move to the next stage of investment and construction. And then our research centre runs to March 2024, and what we'll have is our initial projects completed and new projects funded and coming along. So we're very much in the delivery phase, but crucially, we need to think about how do we share learning meaningfully around communities like this, and how do we think about developing these industrial clusters to really recognise the massive benefits that will come from all possible means of decarbonising industry rather than just focusing on the carbon capture and hydrogen elements that we are particularly investing in at the moment. So I hope you will see a lot more, and we really do want to engage as much as possible to learn about new ideas you've got and how we might use some of these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, and now I'm going to put you into I'm going to set up the breakout rooms. Breakout parallel session A is ceramic, cement and glass, chaired by Phil Purnell. Parallel session B is metals, chaired by Rossi Secchi. And parallel session C is paper and chemicals, chaired by Graham Ormonroyd. So you just need to select which parallel session you want to go into. If you have any problems, then the KTN is online to help you out. So I'm just about to open the rooms.
So welcome back, everyone. We're going to make a start again. Hope you had a nice break. It's now my great pleasure to be welcoming Nancy Bocken. So she is a professor in sustainable business at Maastricht University, and also has many various visiting and collaborative partnerships with universities in the UK as well. She is a globally leading expert in circular economy and sustainable business model innovation. And I'm really looking forward to your talk, Nancy, and I'm just going to hand over straight away to you. Thank you.
Great, Anne, and thank you for the invitation. And I tried to participate in some of the sessions earlier today, so I hope it will fit in a little bit, or at least spark some other thoughts, as Anne asked me to do as well. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about transitions and circular business model innovation. So please jump in if anything is unclear with the slides, or if I speak too fast or something else, and I will try to respond to that. So first of all, why is this topic important? So first of all, why is this topic important? So we live in a linear economy, which is quite an inefficient system to manage our resources. It's very profitable, but not so good for the environment. So what we see is that there's a high turnover of products, but also very fast consumption, which also leads to decreasing product lifetimes, because that's embedded in the business model, and also high levels of waste. So we basically see a loss of value embedded in the product, and also a loss of material value. So in my research with my colleague Sam Short, we actually looked into unsustainable business models and what these are. So basically prominently across different sectors, from the energy sector to also clothing and also financing, we see many unsustainable business models that exist, such as environmental resource exploitation and human resource exploitation. You wouldn't think that that would be acceptable, but many business models still work like that. Unhealthy or unsustainable offerings, offering quantity over quality, basically, but also addictive consumption patterns, like sort of getting people addicted to certain products and services. So just one example, every second, one garbage truck of textiles is landfilled or burned. And this is just one of the examples based on some of the unsustainable business models that we have. So the circular economy transition can be quite complicated when you think about it, but I try to break it down usually into 4 easy categories that makes it more comprehensible, and to think about where should we go next. So the first one is basically narrowing the loop. So that's minimizing resources per product. And we see that companies get very efficient at this, because it usually also saves costs while it saves resources. Slowing the loop is about product longevity and lifetime extension. And you see that that is being done a lot less, because sometimes the business model doesn't seem to be obvious behind this. And when people think about circular economy, they often think only about closing the loop and recycling. I think we need to go beyond that. Most important one of the important ones that is being added is also regeneration, like improving the natural environment in which companies exist. Why is this important? It can lead to mitigation of environmental impact, but also could help with some of the adaptation to climate change. So that's why it's becoming more and more important. So in addition to these resource strategies, there's also a couple of perspectives that you can take on innovation. So when companies start innovating for the circular economy, they often start on the product and technology level. This is a good start, but I think it could be more powerful to look into business models and entire systems change. And we'll give you some examples on that in a bit. So one of the 2004 studies already by Arnold Tucker basically also found that up to 90% reductions in environmental impact could be possible if you would focus on a combination of the product and the business model and not just innovating the technology or the product. So that's why this area of product service systems and new business models could be very important, and it's quite exciting. Well, in the past, and this is a busy slide, I don't expect you to read all the detail, but while in the past, companies have focused on maybe the material innovations and also the product innovations, now we can see a shift happening. So this is an example of H&M that was also checked by H&M to see what type of innovations they were doing. Like in the beginning, they were maybe making a conscious collection, they call it, with better materials and maybe having information on how to take care of the products. But now they're really looking into secondhand, rental, vintage, but also subscriptions where you can recover the material and maybe recycle it. Another example in the Netherlands is Mud Jeans, and they now collaborate with IKEA. So Mud Jeans is a lease concept for jeans. And now the old jeans are being used to turn them into, for instance, new sofa covers with IKEA. So you can see that as of late, I think from about 2018, 2019, when you look into different companies and examples, and these are more consumer-facing ones, then you basically see that there's more of a tendency to go to business model and ecosystem innovation. So I wanted to show you some examples of what is happening and what could be impactful. I think narrowing the loop or efficiencies could still be very good. At the product level, you could design lightweight products, very obvious, then you need less material. But in this case, with a smaller car, it also needs less fuel. So that's a win-win situation. When you look at closing the loop, obvious one could be using just one material per product, like in this wooden chair case. And also, by the way it's being assembled, you can also easily take it apart and recover the materials and maybe upgrade and reuse materials. When you look at slowing the loop, companies often ask me, Nancy, how can this be profitable? But I think there are quite a few examples that show that it could be profitable. But also nice combinations of product and business model innovation. So here you can see, for instance, Coda, which is a multifunctional and movable housing solution. It's quite interesting. It's a full house, which is only 20 square meters. So it's basically a minimal viable space without any unnecessary details added to it. And it's also interesting because it's movable and therefore potentially reusable. So these are some of those more radical innovations to maybe slow the loop and also have a reusable and smaller product and potentially also business model associated with it. Another example is fairly recent. It's actually from Saint-Gobain, and they only tested it in the Nordics, in Sweden and Denmark. But basically what Saint-Gobain found is that gypsum waste is being created through the way it's being ordered and also being used in the installation process. Like up to 25% of the ordered boards they estimate are being wasted. So Saint-Gobain has started a service which is called the at-hand service, and it's more made to demand. So they sort of investigate with the customer, like, what do you actually need and how much gypsum boards do you need? And this is the way they deal with it now to manage the demands. So basically they need 0% rework as a result of it. It takes less time to install and also 50% less waste. So it's quite an interesting business model that they're trying to roll out now in different places. Then when you look at the final strategy, regenerating the loop, you see lots of companies now like IKEA, but also Unilever trying to work on land regeneration because it's basically degrading in many places, and they understand that their future supplies are based on the quality of the land. So there's a lot to do in the regenerating space. And this is a Dutch example, and all the cases you can actually find on the Circular X website, which is a project that I'm responsible at the moment for. So it's about experimentation with new business models. But this case, Kruivanger, is quite interesting. Like, they really have a vision that buildings could be like trees. So basically the green facades can help absorb air pollution, and also maybe the rooftops can capture capture rainwater, for instance. So they basically want to create a future vision for buildings and have regenerative buildings in the future. So you could imagine even whole cities built around this. So this is really a product and a business model combination, because they also work with raw material passports and material banks. So the suppliers of the materials can retrieve the materials at the end of the product lifetime. Another Dutch example is the ocean cleanup, started by a TU Delft student, but now has grown quite quickly. And it's more like an ecosystem innovation, because they basically saw that it even takes 20 years, even with this innovation, to get rid of the world's ocean plastic. So it's more of an ecosystem perspective, because they really look for partnerships, like who shares the same problem around plastic waste and who wants to solve it with us, basically. So what they do is create maybe also new products out of it. One of them is, for instance, the sunglasses made out of ocean plastic. So they try to see who, as a customer, might be interested in plastic waste. And maybe people are into the outdoors and surfing, etc., who need sunglasses, might be more interested in solving this issue of ocean plastic. So this is more like an ecosystems example. And then a final example is around kitchen as a service, but there was a whole report on products as a service recently by Systemic. And basically through a service model, you can avoid a lot of waste potentially. In the Netherlands, it's estimated that 40,000 kitchen units are being thrown away each year. And a service model around modular design, reusable materials, but also energy efficient appliances could be quite good. Of course, from a sustainability perspective, to close, narrow, and also slow the loop, but could also make it more affordable, because who has the money to upgrade appliances and upgrade a kitchen? So with maybe a service model, you can avoid some of those upfront costs and also the upgrading costs. So this is one example, but this is still very much in the pilot phase. And when talking about piloting, I'm actually thinking about what should be the next steps then for circular economy. What should we be doing? Like, there's two things as I see it at the moment. So the transition is still quite gradual, quite slow. And we might also focus on the easy strategies, like the low-hanging fruits, which is good to start, but we also need to move our focus. So first of all, to do that, we need to experiment, but also scale up. And we should also focus on the more difficult strategies, like slowing the loop and regeneration, in addition to narrowing and closing the loop. So that comes down to then business experimentation, which is my recent topic. And I wanted to just put a picture there to show you what it might look like. It's based on Eric Ries's lean startup. But basically, when you experiment, you often start with a view on what the future value proposition or offering to the customer might be, and what your purpose is, like I want to move to a more circular business. And then you iteratively, like for instance, the kitchen example, start exploring what the perfect proposition might be. And often you start with desirability, testing really what the customer wants, and then feasibility and viability. So this is typically the order that companies take. And then also circularity, like you might think like as a service might be good, but you also need to test whether it's really better from that perspective. So at the Circular X project that is about experimentation with circular business models, we actually focus on developing methods to support this process. And after this iteration, you can actually do a pilot with customers to see like, where should we go next? And that's why I want to talk very briefly about a case that I've been very closely involved with. So basically it's called Homey. It's actually a business I co-founded already in 2016. And it's a case of circular business model experimentation. And I will show you one of the examples that we did to experiment with innovations there. So what is HOMI for people who might not know it? So it's a pay-per-use business model. So it's also already what Arnold Tucker in 2004 recommended, one of the models to maybe achieve a 90% reduction in environmental impact. So if you pay-per-use, in our case, when we started, everything installment, everything was free, repair, removal, everything included in the price. We had a tracking device. It was initially just an Arduino, basically installed in the washing machine to send usage data to HOMI and see when people were using the washing machine. And we also used differentiated pricing to stimulate energy efficiency. So washing machine installed for free in your home, and you only basically pay when you use the washing machine. And the pricing model basically looked as follows. So a cold wash was 75 cents, and the most expensive wash was a 90-degree wash, because it's the most unsustainable wash. So it was a very basic principle that we could stimulate people to wash less and at lower temperatures. And as academics, and next to being an entrepreneur, we also had to set up an experiment. So basically here you can see the result of that experiment. So basically what we wanted to see is whether we could change laundry behavior. So we gave people a free month 0 basically, and that was sort of a marketing trick, as well as a way to do this test. And we could basically see that after this free month, people started using the washing machine less and also at lower temperatures. But of course it has some tailing off there. And we see, significant difference also statistically, and it's about a 25% reduction in environmental impact in the use phase. And of course, you can see that there's a lot of other impacts across the product life cycle, but we of course try to make sure the washing machines last as long as possible and also recycle them at the end. So we try to create a holistic model out of it. So basically, I will come to my conclusion. So some tips, the way that I see it, at least from a circular economy and an innovation perspective. My suggestion is to diversify the resource strategies, like try and look at all the resource strategies and not only recycling, for example. Diversify the innovation strategy. I think product and technology innovations are very important, but we also need to look at the business models and the ecosystems, because the problems go well beyond company boundaries. And my suggestion would be to experiment with innovation at all levels. It's fun, but it can also lead to real impactful new business propositions. And I want to end with a positive note. A quote that I keep using because I really like it, because it's also positive, I guess. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. And you can contact me at on the below contact details. And there's also the website at the bottom. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, excellent. Yes, I mean, obviously your presentation is scheduled at the end of this conference to really trigger further thoughts to kind of move beyond recycling. We noticed that in the foundation industries that there's already fantastic interest in recycling and industrial symbiosis, making the best possible use of waste and byproducts in that way. But there's also a lot to win from moving beyond recycling. So thank you very much for that presentation. There are quite a few questions in the chat, so I'm just going to run through a few. So Peter Bol has asked, what is the typical experimentation cycle? Does it take 1 month, 1 year? Is it shorter than that?
Of course, it all depends, but it's relatively short, actually, when you look at it. So, there's a study that is under review with Philips and IKEA and H&M, and basically some of the experiments were for 2 or 3 months for quite a short period. But if it's then, so that might be testing the desirability or the feasibility or the viability. So the order is often start with desirability, because that's most important. If it's not desirable, why bother? And then the experiments come closer to reality. So you add in what is feasible, but also what is financially viable. So that is typically the order. So some are 1 month, but also in a previous project in the UK, we also had experiments that just took a week. So but if it's longer and more disruptive, maybe 2 to 3 months, you might need it to see how effective it is.
Yeah, so it's actually relatively quick, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, and if the nice thing about the experiment is that it creates enthusiasm in the business as well. So if you see that something is effective, like for instance, a secondhand proposition in a shop, like with H&M, for instance, then it creates an easy following because it's effective, proven in a real shop. So why not do the same? So I think that's also the power of an experiment.
Yeah, so there's actually two follow-on questions about that. So creating enthusiasm, maybe slightly related to that. What is the appetite for risk that you've seen in these experiments from companies?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, but also I think I'm actually quite positive. Like I wrote this proposal for the project in 2018, and now I started it actually in 2020. That's how it worked with these project timelines. But when I wrote it, there weren't so many experiments yet. So I was really worried that I had to search very carefully for a needle in a haystack. But that's actually not the case. There are many experiments, but when you look into the detail of it, of course, they start with the safer ones. So for instance, a device that is quite expensive and would maybe be a bit too expensive for a person to buy, then you could try subscription. So there's also a real problem in the business that they might not be able to sell it one-off, but then it could be almost like a try before you buy then when you do a subscription or rental option. So it's also a way to get customers to access a product that might not be affordable to them as well. And I think, not all products are still suitable. That's another aspect. So I talked about products and business models. So sometimes you need to start with products that are of the highest value as well. And often companies know quite well which of their brands is the most premium or highest value one. So you might start experimenting with that. And if it works well, then you can sort of also start improving other, durability of other products in your portfolio, so to say.
Yeah, very interesting. So, okay, so my next question is sort of related to that, because also the business model experimentation also seems to be associated with quite a change in behavior, but also in culture, both within the company and across society. I was wondering if you can say more about that. How can we help with such cultural change?
Yeah, try it yourself. I guess there's loads of challenges to, for instance, not buy products or buy less or buy secondhand. And we're also doing a cross-cultural comparison now for a project because we cover multiple countries. And we're looking into factors that companies consider when they launch different business models in different locations. And the proposition might need to be different in different countries because of the cultural context. Like secondhand is not so accepted everywhere, so then it might be remanufactured. So the customer doesn't notice that it's maybe used before, but the quality is as high as you could expect. But in other contexts, it is acceptable to have secondhand. So you need different propositions in different countries based on cultural aspects as well. So that's very exciting as well. A nice thing for designers to think about as well.
So just sort of making the bridge there from different countries to different sectors. How could we, this is a question from Mark Jolly, so how can we persuade traditional materials companies to change their business models to become more circular and to help with the dematerialization agenda? Yeah,
convince. I think the companies I work with don't need so much convincing because there's a clear proposition from a cost-saving perspective and also a resource security perspective. You even see it, for instance, with Tesla, who makes its own chips that doesn't have supply problems as other companies do that require chips. So I think it will also, because of Corona, because of the Suez Canal or other geopolitical trends, there's also a resource security issue that might arise. So I think from that perspective, it's also a business risk if you don't have circular proposition, so to say. So there's a lot of other reasons besides sustainability, and I want to be better for the environment from a business perspective that could help.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to make the bridge now to some of our other speakers, because I would like to invite some of our industry speakers. So I don't know who's still on the line, but feel free to switch on your cameras if you can, or at least unmute. But John Bolton and Paul Booth and our stakeholder steering group speakers, for as far as we're still here, Martin Jarrett, I see, and quickly going through it, Melanie Jury. Oh, there's still quite a few people on the line, which is good. It's taken me a long time to go through it. So but please feel free to unmute, you know who you are. My question is that, okay, so what is the appetite actually in the foundation industries to go beyond recycling? Is there, I know that there are thoughts about this in some of the sectors, and in any case, and what's going on, and how can we move forward on this agenda? Is there anybody who dares and wants to go first?
If none of go.
Oh yeah, sure. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, John.
And I think we've heard some examples. And Mark's question is quite a good one, because I'm not sure whether Nancy's looked at any of the more traditional sort of manufacturing companies, and like steel companies, aluminium companies, chemical process industries. Because I think there is a desire, and I think there's an appetite for those industries to change their business models, absolutely, to move towards it. But I think the perception is that to get to that point, and this could be wrong, and this might require a different way of thinking it, but the perception that's to get there, it requires significant investment, because you're heavily invested in existing technology, and actually to move your business model to one that requires, for example, in steel, you could see a business model where actually steel is a byproduct of actually recycling, because actually the value in recycling is greater than the value in manufacturing steel. I've looked at business models, but that requires, billions of investment to actually switch the model over. So I think the appetite's there, to answer your question, Anne, but I think the actual investment and the hurdle to actually get there, or the perceived hurdle, because I say there may be other ways of getting there, is too high.
Okay, thank you. Right. Does anybody else want to comment on this one?
Sorry, go on,
from the chemical industry, I think the chemical industry is such a broad church of different processes. It's quite hard to answer that as the chemical industry, because they have so many different raw materials, processes, end products, etc. But I think there's a real desire to, particularly for what I would call intermediate chemicals, is to move to a feedstock position that is either completely without carbon or from a sustainable route to feedstock, to make the feedstocks. So if I think of, not on here, but say ammonia, you don't need natural gas to make ammonia. You do at the moment, but actually you could make it through different ways with just nitrogen and hydrogen. You don't need, there are different technologies that you can use that are available. And then in our process, we know all of our routes all our feedstocks can be made from a sustainable route. Some of them are in infancy in the test tube, and some of them are much more well developed. So I think there is an appetite that is more than just recycling. There's a lot to do with the front end of the chemical industry, a huge amount. But I think it's a very diverse, broad church. You just get different answers from different parts of the chemical industry.
Is there a potential to move towards business models which are essentially leasing the atoms that we use in total? I mean, it's a really difficult thing to do, but is there a feasibility to be able to move towards that? Because I don't know any other way of reducing our materials consumption than actually valuing the materials more highly than we currently do in society. Nobody wants to say anything.
Well, I think in terms of the chemical industry, there is a bit of that in terms of in valuing emissions, so CO2 emissions. So there is, And I think, you know, if you move, I think it's a good point. It's almost, so the chemical industry is mostly, so if we're talking greenhouse gases, net zero, that's carbon based really. I think I heard some wider sort of discussions really around dematerializing much more of society, which isn't necessarily just carbon, it's all resources, which is a, you know, which is a broader conversation, which is really interesting. And
but
how do you value everything?
Can we do it across the sectors? That's the whole point of bringing all the sectors together.
Yeah.
But maybe all the foundation industry, all the materials that we use, if we work together, that's maybe how we can do it. It's not asking one sector to do it on its own. I'm just posing the question. How do we get to that point? Even if it's just getting to the point where the sectors are thinking about it at the end of this 3-year funding.
Yeah, actually, Mark, I'll come in there just, because I have a question about this for our industry people in the first place. And I'll ask our breakout session chairs to come in on this one as well, if they wish. But for industry first, because we are here to support the industry after all. I was wondering if you could say anything about key intervention points to kind of, to enable the transformation of the foundation industry. So John already mentioned investment and access to the right kind of feedstocks. What are the other kind of key intervention points? So it's a really difficult question, I know.
Yeah, it was touched upon in the metals session, so I'm not going to take credit for this because it was other people that were making the point. But policy is an absolute key intervention point, and so if you limit, and I'm taking stealing somebody else's thunder because they've already raised it, but if you limit the ability for people to import virgin material and say, right, we're not going to allow you to use virgin, bauxite. We're not going to allow you to use iron ore. You have to recycle. It proves more value. So you're not going to allow that 6 million tons of scrap to actually be exported out of the UK. There'll be policy interventions to make you change your business model. Now there has to be supporting policy around that. So energy costs have to be looked at as they continue to be looked at. But that would actually be quite a quick way intervention, and you could do the same on imports. I mean, there's a big discussion about carbon tax taking place at the moment. That we should price target carbon into material that's bought into the UK or into Europe. Actually, it's a European argument. So there's some key policy changes that would, I think, quite quickly sort of act as a catalyst to change. I think would stimulate change.
Could I make a comment?
Yeah, please do.
Just perhaps to follow up on that, because I think one of the issues that we face, and I agree with John's comment about investment, that's a key issue. But the other issue is the end customer. And if the end customer won't accept the levels, for example, of recycled product because they've got specifications X, Y, Z, then if you ban the import of prime materials, for example, you could be the one that doesn't get the business. So I think there's got to be, and I think that's perhaps something for TransFIRE, to be honest, is the end customer. I'm particularly talking about automotive here, but it won't just be automotive. We need to engage the complete supply chain to make the change. It can't just be the transformation industries.
Great, thank you. Do any of our session chairs want to say anything about this as well? Feel free to unmute and start talking.
I think most has already been said. I mean, there has to be massive policy drivers. I certainly agree with Martin that the end users need to be on board with the amount of recycle they'll take into their end product. Product has to be fit for purpose, and that intermediate product has to be fit for purpose, which is massively important. And really, to decarbonise the whole of the foundation industries we've taken on a massive task. But I think with the group we've got together, we've got a fantastic group to do that across all foundation industries. So it was really fascinating for me today, looking at how even just two foundation industries that are simply closely linked to the chemical and the paper industry, but looking at the synergies there already and thinking about how the research can drive those synergies and the research give confidence into the end solutions that will be out there in the next 10, 20 years.
Oh, Graham, you seem to be, is it?
It's mine.
I think I'm back, possibly. Yes,
Yes,
sorry,
are.
I sort of heard what Graham was saying, but I had connection issues. I'm very sorry. Phil, did you want to say anything?
No, I think, as Graham said, I think most of it's already been said. I mean, I think from the cements and glass and ceramics room that we chaired, and I think the thing that struck me is, you know, people are clearly, A, have a will to do this, B, and are moving away from silver bullet solutions. I mean, certainly as somebody who works in concrete technology and has done for years, you know, everybody's been focused on silver bullets, you know, a magic low carbon cement or a magic this or a magic that. And I think now what we're seeing is people who are understanding that you're actually going to have to drag in bits and pieces from lots and lots of different places. You're going to have to do some reduction of demand. You're going to have to do some optimization of structural form. You're going to have to do some recycling. You're going to have to do some reuse. You know, it's going to be a combination of all these things. And I think there's too much. Previously, there's been too much focus on looking for that killer app that's going to solve the problem. It isn't. It's going to be, you know, not the death of 1,000 cuts, but the birth of 1,000 additions. That's what we actually need to be doing. So it's encouraging to see that in the room, that people are looking at these multiple parallel solutions nowadays.
Yeah. Okay. Nancy, could you reflect further on key intervention points to transition towards that sustainable circular economy that we all want?
Yeah, I think collaboration and partnerships, and that relates to the demand side. Like a lot of companies now, like Toyota and other businesses, have these grand visions now in circular economy, but it all comes down to the supply chain and also the start of it. So I think that's where it needs to start, and those need to be connected. So I think that is very much in line with the discussions here. So the end of life responsibility for materials and products will only extend under the circular economy package. So I think it will. The policy pressure will come, but it's better to be ahead of that through partnerships.
Yeah, I'll take that. Partnerships before policy and be proactive.
I think the partnership also includes society. And I think that's one of the things that we have to ensure. You know, we've been talking about the customers as in the people who are making the product, but actually I think society is the end customer of all the materials and all the products that we actually use. And so there may be an element of giving information to society about the products that they're using, to enable them to make more informed decisions. And I think that's something that possibly we haven't been doing in the past. And so Graham's comment about you know, quality, as far as I learned it very, very long time ago, probably 35 years ago when I first started in manufacturing, is fit for purpose. That doesn't mean necessarily that the product has to actually be as high spec as sometimes we develop. And I think that's one of the things that we have to challenge, is that have we gone too far down the level of quality, always being high specification? That's not the case. Quality is fit for purpose. It does the job that it's supposed to do. And I think that's something that we have to move away from, is that, as I think Nancy mentioned, you know, persuading people to have remanufactured product, or persuading people that second-hand product. We all live in second-hand, or a lot of us live in second-hand houses and not new houses, and we're accepting of that. But in a lot of other cases, we don't accept second-hand. You know, I see the phrase pre-loved now coming into into clothing, and somehow we've got to accept pre-loved for all of our materials, I think, in the future.
So I think that Bruce has come on stage because he also wanted to add something to the discussion.
Yeah, well, I think just picking up from what Mark was saying about society there and linking to my comment in the chat about partner-based, demand-led innovation in this space. The reason I flagged up packaging first was because literally right now, what I see and in my conversations with them is that the big industries, the big companies who need packaging, you know, so the Unilevers and the Cokes and the Diageos and the Heinekens of this world are the ones who are absolutely on point and already talking about, do you know what, we agree, we know we need to do something about our resource efficiency issue and we really want to work with you on it. So I'd really like to grab the opportunity to work with those who are reacting positively and get things going and then demonstrate to other sectors what can be achieved. The second side of it, and slightly different though, is that we need to press government on its policy again. I'm particularly thinking when we're talking about materials we supply to construction, where certainly in the UK, the figure I generally hear is the government's effectively responsible for 70% of the procurement in construction. So we've got to get them on board with, right, let's do this together and drive what's needed by demand, but doing it hand in hand with that sector. So that was my input.
Yes, thank you. Yes, work with the willing and collaborate with policymakers as well and decision makers, very importantly. So these are all on our agenda, and look forward to make progress on that. I am very conscious of time. I am just going to look very briefly at Padlet to see if there's anything that we want to share from that. I noticed that there's lots of things that have been said and that I've also copied over from the chat and the various presentations that I've seen. Thank you very much for all of the presentations, and thank you, Nancy, also for presenting and taking part in our discussion. Really very much appreciated. So just I won't share the screen because that would just take time, but essentially on the Padlet, we see discussions about jobs and skills and making sure that opportunities that are there in the transition, that they also become available for communities so that they can benefit from transforming foundation industries. See lots of discussion on industrial symbiosis, which is really good, and moving that we should be moving faster than our competing countries on this agenda to take the competitive advantage. And we see comments here. How we basically can use strategies that we've just discussed, like going beyond recycling to minimize resource use. In terms of equality, diversity, and inclusion initiatives, I can see here that there's a comment from about the Institute of Materials, Minerals and Mining about their ED&I activities, which we look forward to tie into. And also, again, about creating a talent pipeline, making sure that we have people with the right skills to really work also in these transformed industries, because it's one thing to aim for the technological change, but if you don't have the people to actually work in those manufactories, then it's still going to be a really difficult story, of course. There are loads of governance and economic and social, environmental and technical drivers being mentioned. One that really stood out also in terms of discussion in the chat was about the energy from end of waste. So we've seen lots of questions and comments about that. And it's also on our radar to work on that, on the end of waste, and to see if there's anything that we can do, for example, in terms of updating or helping to develop new quality protocols. Yeah, there's the UK devolution with diverging decarbonization policies, if I'm not mistaken, which are a challenge that we like to collaborate on. And of course, in general, there's lots of decarbonization policy and new regulations coming through. Reach breach, basically reach after Brexit, also a huge challenge. In terms of economic drivers, talking about boosting productivity and willingness from customers to buy the products, new economic models, and the risk of technology and business model lock-in due to the high investments, and also incorporating true environmental and social costs into products and material prices. There's some discussion about mapping waste and resource streams, so making the best use of digital economy developments there. In terms of social, again, talking about jobs and making sure that new technologies are socially responsible, enabling cross-sectoral collaboration, which is why we're here. So glad to see that one being mentioned. Changing public attitudes and creating a more collaborative culture. In environment, it's much about carbon. If I may, one comment in response to that would be that it's great to decarbonize, but not if we are, well, we have to, but we have to be careful that we're not creating trade-offs with other environmental impacts, such as on the abiotic environment. Lots of ideas about technological innovation, and that is more or less it. So I'll leave it at that and hand over, I believe, to AJ. Mark, you're on mute. To you. Okay. Oh yeah, yes. Of course, AJ's already.
AJ's gone.
Yes.
So I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yeah.
And so it's really my role to wind this conference up and to get to the end. I've been asked by the KTN just to advertise a couple of things that are coming up. So firstly, on the 12th of October, we have the KTN is and UKRI, or the UKRI is launching the demo competition briefing event. There's also the conference program. The two other remaining conferences in this series for the TFI is on the next one is on the 18th of October, Sensors, Controls and Digitalization for Resource Efficiency. And then on the 3rd of November, Energy Efficiency, looking at process efficiency and heat recovery. There's more information on that on the KTN website, which is the link you can see there. And then there's going to be a video with tips on how to be successful. I'm sure everybody's not going to be successful because that wouldn't be the aim of a competition, but how to be potentially more successful and write a good demo application, which is going to be released. And then on the 16th and 17th of November, there's going to be a drop-in clinic, ask the experts from any final questions for the demo competition. And then the 1st of December, the demo competition application deadline is there. So the demo application has to be written by the 1st of December. So that's a couple of months away. It's about 8 weeks. Secondly, the next slide has the contacts: Tatiana Correa, AJ Kapadia, Neelam Mughal, and Robert Quashie, the materials contacts at KTN. So coming back to TransFIRE, we've launched TransFIRE now. We've started. We would like people who are interested to get in touch with us via our links that Sanju Padea has been posting in the chat, and we will shortly have a website to be able to do that. You can also contact us via the TFI Network Plus. They will also forward us any links to us of people who want to work with TransFIRE. They already have a website. That's why I'm mentioning that. And so just to reiterate, we are building, we have built, and we will continue to build on our multidisciplinary research practice-driven hub. We will continue to work in and look at these optimization of the flows of the resources with the work streams that we have, and we want people to be involved in those work streams and the technical working groups. We will end up with improved competitiveness, we believe, and we've started to work with the communities, as Peter has demonstrated. And this all is supporting the UK net zero 2050 targets for greenhouse emissions. And actually, if you look as well, our last aim is also to increase the diversity across the foundation industries. And I bear in mind what Melanie stated, that in the chemical industry, it's relatively diverse, but maybe that is not the case over all the foundation industries. And it's our challenge is to take what's good in some sectors and transfer it across to other sectors to see how we do that. And then this is going to enable our change from pre-TransFIRE to a post-TransFIRE world. And I'd just like to thank everybody that's remained on the call. Thank you for staying. As I said, join us as a partner at TransFIRE at cranfield.ac.uk. If you send an email to there, we will be dealing with it. And I've mentioned the upcoming events. So thank you very much. Thanks for your time, and thanks for being here today.